A day like any other. The aroma of cinnamon and nutmeg pulled Malcolm from sleep before his alarm could blare. He blinked, the pale morning light filtering through the gaps in his blinds painting stripes across his face. 6 a.m. He stretched, a satisfying crackle echoing in his spine, and swung his legs over the side of the bed. Today was Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and he was eager to delve into King's letter from Birmingham jail with his 8th graders. He believed in the power of King's words to ignite understanding and empathy, especially now, in a world that seemed to be forgetting how to listen. He padded to the kitchen, the cool tile a sharp contrast to the warmth of his bedroom. Humming a gospel tune his grandmother used to sing, he whisked eggs, added a splash of milk, and chopped a handful of spinach. He rarely skipped breakfast. It was a small ritual, a grounding start to a day that often demanded every ounce of his energy. As the eggs sizzled in the pan, he glanced at the worn copy of King's letter resting on the counter. He'd highlighted certain passages, mentally rehearsing how he'd guide his students through the nuances of King's argument for nonviolent resistance. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, his mind already picturing the faces of his students. There was Maria, bright and inquisitive, always ready with a thoughtful question. And David, usually quiet, but with a hidden well of compassion. And even young Samuel, who often struggled with attention, but whose heart, Malcolm suspected, was as big as the sky. He finished his breakfast, washed the dishes, and changed into a crisp button-down shirt and corduroy pants. He chose a tie with subtle African patterns, a quiet nod to his heritage and a silent promise to his ancestors. The school buzzed with the chaotic energy of a Monday morning. Lockers slammed, laughter echoed, and the air hummed with the anxious anticipation of a new week. Malcolm stood just inside the entrance, a warm smile on his face, greeting each student as they filed in. "Good morning, Maria. Ready to change the world today?" he asked, earning a shy grin. "Morning, David. How was your weekend?" A mumbled response, but a small smile flickered across David's face. "Samuel. Glad to see you, young man. Let's make today a great one." His classroom was a sanctuary of learning, filled with posters of influential figures, books overflowing from shelves, and the comforting scent of old paper and chalk dust. He'd arranged the desks in a circle to foster discussion, and the whiteboard was already filled with a quote from King: "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." He surveyed the room, making sure everything was in place. The bell rang, and his students shuffled in, some eager, some hesitant, all unique. He began the lesson with a brief overview of King's life and legacy, then transitioned to the letter itself. He read aloud, his voice resonating with conviction, pausing to explain complex concepts and answer questions. He encouraged them to think critically about King's words, to consider their relevance in the present day. "What do you think King meant when he said, 'Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere'?" he asked, his gaze sweeping across the circle. Maria raised her hand. "I think he meant that if we let injustice happen to some people, it could eventually happen to all of us." "Excellent, Maria," Malcolm said. "Can anyone elaborate on that?" David, surprisingly, spoke up. "It's like if you see someone being bullied and you don't do anything, then the bully might start picking on you too." Malcolm nodded, pleased. "Exactly. King believed that we all have a responsibility to stand up for what is right, even when it's difficult." Outside the school, parked across the street, Officer Bradley watched Malcolm through the tinted windows of his patrol car. He'd been observing the school for the past hour, ever since the call came over the radio about the bank robbery downtown. The suspect was described as a black male, approximately 6 feet tall, wearing a blue jacket. Bradley hadn't seen anyone matching the description, but something about the school, about the way the black teacher interacted with the students, rubbed him the wrong way. He adjusted his cap, his jaw tight. It wasn't just the description. It was the way the teacher carried himself, with an air of confidence that Bradley found unsettling. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of men he'd arrested, men who thought they were above the law. He didn't trust them, not one bit. He watched as Malcolm stood by the door of the school, greeting students. The man's smile seemed forced, his eyes too watchful. Bradley's gut churned with suspicion. It was a feeling he'd learned to trust over the years, a sixth sense honed by years on the force. He'd seen enough to know that things weren't always what they seemed. Bradley reached for his radio, his thumb hovering over the transmit button. He hesitated. He didn't have any concrete evidence, just a feeling. But that feeling was strong, insistent. He glanced at the school again, his eyes narrowing. He'd keep watching, he decided. Just to be sure. He stewed in the car, growing ever more suspicious. The school bell rang, and students began to pour out. Malcolm watched his students file out of the classroom, their faces animated with the energy of youth. He smiled, feeling a sense of satisfaction. He believed in the power of education, in its ability to transform lives and create a more just and equitable world. He reminded them to reflect on King's message and to strive to be agents of change in their own communities. As the last student disappeared down the hallway, he began to gather his papers, preparing for his next class. He felt a tap on his shoulder and turned to see Officer Bradley standing in the doorway, his face grim. "Malcolm Hayes?" the officer asked, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. Malcolm frowned, a knot forming in his stomach. "Yes, officer." "I need you to come with me," Bradley said. "You're under arrest." Shadow of suspicion. Static blared from the police scanner, slicing through the quiet of Officer Bradley's cruiser. Armed robbery, Goldman's jewelry, suspect, male, black, around 6 feet, dark hooded sweatshirt. Bradley, mid-sip of tepid coffee, sat bolt upright. Goldman's? A scant 5 blocks from MLK Middle School. He jotted the bare-bones details, the pen a frantic tap dance against the paper, amplified by his spiking pulse. 6 feet. Dark hoodie. Uselessly generic. He hit the radio. "Dispatch, confirm suspect description." "Anything more definitive?" The dispatcher's voice, clipped and strained, echoed back, "Negative, Bradley. That's all we've got. Fled on foot, direction unknown." Bradley muttered a curse. A hooded sweatshirt in January? It described half the black young men in the city. He mentally mapped the local geography, the school, the gleaming jewelry store, the connecting arteries of streets. The MLK Day festivities would be dwindling, but still, people milling about. He drained his coffee, the bitter dregs failing to soothe the knot tightening in his gut. Logic demanded more, forensics, witness testimony, something tangible. But the dispatcher's nebulous outline buzzed persistently in his thoughts, a distracting drone. He idled at the curb opposite Goldman's. Yellow tape, a garish ribbon of warning, snapped in the frigid wind. 2 officers stood sentinel, their faces etched with duty. He recognized O'Malley, fresh from the academy. "Anything, O'Malley?" Bradley called, lowering his window. The young officer shook his head. "Owner's pretty rattled." Said the guy moved like lightning, knew exactly what he wanted. Grabbed a tray of top-dollar diamond rings. "Description?" "Same as you heard, officer. Black male, tall, dark hoodie." Couldn't make out his face. Bradley tapped a restless rhythm on the steering wheel. This dearth of information was maddening. He surveyed the flow of pedestrians, the humdrum rhythm of midday life. A mother pushing a pram, teenagers dissolving into laughter, an elderly man wrestling with groceries. None fit, not precisely. Then, he spotted him. Strolling away from the direction of the school, a black man, tall, wearing a dark, almost navy, hooded coat. He carried a briefcase, his head bowed, seemingly trying to disappear into the crowd. There was a deliberateness about his stride. A purposeful, almost hurried gait. It was Malcolm Hayes. The schoolteacher. Bradley's stomach clenched. He flashed back to yesterday, Hayes's steady gaze, the quiet challenge in his eyes. He'd felt subtly judged. He knew it was irrational, but the feeling lingered. He knew the odds were slim. Hayes was a respected educator, a bedrock of the community. But the description, the hurried pace. He eased away from the curb, the tires whispering on the frozen asphalt. He shadowed Hayes, maintaining a careful distance, his mind a whirlwind of doubt and suspicion. This was a leap. He had nothing concrete. But the seed of uncertainty had sprouted, thriving in the fertile ground of prejudice and the pressure to solve the case. He contacted dispatch. "I'm trailing a possible suspect in the Goldman's robbery. Black male, tall, dark hooded coat. Eastbound on Elm." The dispatcher's voice, sharper now, tinged with alarm, crackled in response. "Copy that, Bradley. Proceed with extreme caution. Backup is on its way." Bradley's grip tightened on the wheel, his knuckles bone white. He knew he was on shaky ground, driven by intuition rather than fact. But he couldn't dismiss the nagging feeling that he was right. Hayes was the one. He just needed proof. The long shadow of suspicion had fallen, and Bradley was determined to follow it, heedless of the consequences that might lie ahead. An arrest in broad daylight. The schoolyard baked under the noontide sun, its brick facade ablaze in ochre and gold. Recess throbbed with life. Giggles spiraled into joyful screams as children darted across the asphalt, their exuberant voices briefly eclipsing the distant drone of traffic. Malcolm Hayes, a well-loved fourth-grade teacher, leaned against the building's rough surface, a warm smile gracing his lips as he observed the children. He clutched a dog-eared Tom Sawyer, poised to resume the river adventures after the break. A police cruiser crunched to a halt in the parking lot, Officer Bradley behind the wheel. The engine's cutoff ushered in a sudden hush, a stark contrast to the children's vivacious play. He inhaled deeply, the air thick with mown grass and youthful exuberance. The school, a brick bastion of learning, rose before him, triggering an unexpected tremor of unease. He dismissed it as pre-action jitters. Adjusting his uniform and smoothing his hair, he emerged from the vehicle. His boots clicked purposefully toward the entrance, passing a hopscotch game, the chalk rendering a kaleidoscope of color on the paved yard. The players halted, their eyes wide with curiosity as he approached. He offered a perfunctory nod, but his attention remained fixated on the door. Inside, the school unfolded into a labyrinth of vibrant corridors and bulletin boards plastered with student creations. The air, cool and subtly scented with floor wax and crayon, provided relief from the heat. Locating the principal's office, he presented his badge to the secretary, a woman of middle age whose kind face belied a businesslike demeanor. "I need to speak with Malcolm Hayes," he stated, his tone unwavering. The secretary's brow furrowed with concern. "Mr. Hayes is teaching. Is there a problem, officer?" "I have a warrant for his arrest," Bradley declared, his words leaving no space for negotiation. The secretary's complexion drained of color. "A warrant? But Mr. Hayes is an exceptional teacher. There has to be some mistake." Ignoring her pleas, Bradley pressed, "Where is his classroom?" Defeated, the secretary gestured down the hall. "Room 204. Bradley moved with determined strides, the rhythmic thud of his shoes echoing. Reaching room 204, he paused outside, taking a steadying breath. The sound of Hayes' voice reached him, rich and engaging, lost in the text. He braced himself and pushed the door open. The room fell silent, every student turning as one to stare. Malcolm Hayes stood at the head of the class, book still in hand, now frozen. 20 pairs of eyes fixed on the entrance, wide with surprise and uncertainty. The cheerful alphabet strung across the blackboard suddenly seemed a cruel mockery of the scene. "Mr. Hayes," Bradley announced, his voice cutting through the quiet. "I have a warrant for your arrest. You'll need to come with me." A collective intake of breath swept the room. Hayes' face registered a disbelief that bordered on shock. What? What's this about? You have the right to remain silent, Bradley began, reciting the familiar mantra. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The children watched, their faces mirroring a mixture of dread and bewilderment. A small girl with pigtails and luminous eyes, Lily Peterson, raised her hand. Officer, what's happening? Why are you arresting Mr. Hayes? Bradley offered no acknowledgement. He approached and placed a hand on Malcolm's arm. Let's go. Hayes offered no resistance. Instead, he looked at his students, his eyes conveying a profound mix of sorrow and unspoken apology. It'll be all right, he assured them, his voice tight with emotion. I'll see you all soon. As Bradley escorted Malcolm from the classroom, Lily Peterson rose to her feet. He didn't do anything, she cried, her voice trembling with indignation. Mr. Hayes is a good man. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, escalating into a chorus of bewildered protest, their innocent voices ringing with outrage. Mrs. Davison, another teacher, rushed in, her face ashen with alarm. What's going on? She demanded, her voice sharp. Bradley ignored the rising tide of turmoil. He steered Malcolm down the corridor, drawing the stares of other teachers and students. The school's previously buoyant atmosphere fractured, replaced by a palpable sense of fear and confusion. Reaching the parking lot, Malcolm Hayes finally broke his silence. What is this about, officer? What am I being charged with? Bradley opened the patrol car's rear door. Jewelry store robbery. You fit the description. Malcolm Hayes stared at him, his eyes blazing with indignation. That's preposterous. I was here, teaching my class. Bradley pushed him into the vehicle. Tell it to the judge. The patrol car sped away, leaving a school full of frightened children and baffled staff. Lily Peterson watched it shrink into the distance, her heart pounding with an unshakable conviction. This was not the justice she understood. This was something else entirely, something deeply, fundamentally wrong. Divided town. The late news buzzed from the television at Gables, the Greasy Spoon a sanctuary for farmers ending long days, shopkeepers locking up, and graveyard shift workers steeling themselves for their own kind of labor. Coffee fumes mingled with the murmur as eyes fixed on the screen. Officer Bradley's grim visage morphed into shaky footage of Malcolm, cuffed and escorted. The headline screamed, "Local teacher embroiled in jewelry store theft." Utensils stilled, conversation died. Martha, the waitress, hesitated mid-pour, her forehead creased. Malcolm Hayes? No. He always struck me as genuine. Earl, a retired grease monkey perched on a stool, snorted. Genuine? They all seem genuine, Martha. Folks hide things. Besides, that place has been bleeding money. Probably desperate. Earl, that's low, Mrs. Gable snapped, scrubbing the already pristine counter. Malcolm taught my grandson right from wrong. He's a good influence. This is some kind of mistake. A cacophony of opinions erupted, seasoned with conjecture and bias. Someone recalled seeing Malcolm near the jewelry store, conveniently neglecting to mention the library stood just a block away and he was a regular patron. Others blamed the changing times, their anxieties dripping with prejudice. Every replay of Malcolm's perp walk seemed to further calcify judgment. Meanwhile, miles away, Sarah Hayes was buried in spreadsheets at the community center, orchestrating a fundraiser for disadvantaged kids. Her phone vibrated incessantly, silenced as she wrestled with donation requests. As 11 told, she finally sank back, exhaustion painting lines around her eyes. Unlocking her phone, she braced for a flood of work emails, but found a string of missed calls from her sister, Maya, and a stark text, "Call now." It's Malcolm. A cold fist clenched in Sarah's gut. She dialed, her hand betraying a slight tremor. Sarah, oh my God, Maya's voice, a raw wire, crackled through the speaker. Have you seen the news? Malcolm, they arrested Malcolm. The words landed like a hammer blow. Arrested? For what? What are you talking about? In a breathless jumble, Maya relayed what she knew, snippets from social media, hysterical phone calls. The jewelry store, Bradley, the school's stunned silence, a colleague's stammered disbelief. Sarah struggled to absorb it all. Malcolm, a thief? Ludicrous. He possessed an almost painful honesty. He wouldn't swipe a sugar packet, much less knock over a jewelry store. It's a mistake, Maya, Sarah insisted, her voice wavering but resolute. A terrible mistake. I'll fix it. How, Sarah? It's everywhere. People are already condemning him. Then I'll prove them wrong, Sarah vowed, steel sharpening her tone. I know my husband. He's innocent, and I'll fight like hell to prove it. First thing, I'm at the police station. The call ended, her mind a whirlwind of plans. A lawyer, a shark, someone unafraid to challenge the system, someone who would champion Malcolm with her own unbridled passion. Grabbing her purse, she plunged into the night, the weight of injustice heavy on her shoulders. The cool air offered a brief reprieve, but a fire raged within. She would not abandon Malcolm. She would be his bulwark, his voice, his unshakable faith. She would dismantle every lie, expose every deception, until the truth shone through. The fight had begun, and Sarah Hayes was ready. Before Judge Thompson. The courtroom's overhead lights buzzed, casting a clinical pall over Malcolm's rising dread. He sat rigidly beside Mr. Abernathy, his appointed counsel, whose crooked tie seemed to echo Malcolm's own unraveling composure. The stale air carried a scent of aged documents and hushed tension, a stark contrast to the vibrant hues and eager chatter of his fifth-grade classroom. Crayons and childish glee were now a distant memory. All rise, the bailiff's resonant voice commanded. Judge Thompson entered, an imposing figure sculpted from stone, his face an impassive mask. His tailored suit fit flawlessly, and his silver hair was slicked back with precision. He settled into his elevated seat, his gaze sweeping the room, briefly snagging on Malcolm. The momentary focus stretched into an eternity. The clerk recited the charges: grand larceny, possession of stolen goods. The words echoed, each syllable a blow to Malcolm's fragile control. How does the defendant plead? Judge Thompson's voice, a low monotone, revealed nothing. Not guilty, Your Honor, Mr. Abernathy offered, his voice a touch thin. Malcolm's throat constricted. He longed to proclaim his innocence, to explain his alibi, but prudence held him back. This was not the arena for impassioned declarations. Judge Thompson gave a clipped nod. The defendant is remanded. Bail is set at $75,000. Malcolm's spirit sank. An insurmountable sum. He sought out Sarah in the gallery, her face pale but unwavering. Their eyes met, a silent vow exchanged. He knew she would fight, he had to trust in her tenacity. The bailiff led him away, the harsh clang of handcuffs punctuating the end of the hearing. One final glimpse of Sarah lingered as he vanished through the oaken doors, an emblem of hope in the gathering gloom. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as Sarah pushed through the departing crowd. She felt the weight of their gazes, the unvoiced criticisms clinging to her like a second skin. A strange cocktail of fear and defiance coursed through her. She walked tall, a dethroned queen still exuding resolve. Mr. Abernathy intercepted her just outside. Mrs. Hayes, he said, fidgeting with his tie. I realize this is trying. Trying? Sarah's voice was taut. My husband is innocent. He's being held on fabricated charges. Trying is a gross understatement. Mr. Abernathy sighed, the sound heavy. Judge Thompson isn't known for his compassion, Mrs. Hayes. And the prosecution appears to have a compelling case. appears to. Sarah pressed. Or is it? Have you examined the evidence? Spoken with Malcolm? I've reviewed the police report, he replied, avoiding her gaze. And I've had a brief conversation with your husband. However. However what? Judge Thompson. He adheres rigidly to procedure. And he leans towards the prosecution. Particularly in these situations. Sarah's blood chilled. Situations like this? What are you implying? Mr. Abernathy shifted uneasily. Well, you understand, a black man accused of robbing a jewelry store in a predominantly white community. Sarah recoiled, as if slapped. Are you suggesting that his race is a factor? I'm saying that perception holds sway, Mrs. Hayes. And at present, the prevailing perception does not favor your husband. Sarah refused to succumb to despair. Then we'll reshape that perception, she declared, her voice shaky but resolute. We will uncover the truth, and we'll expose it. She devoted the afternoon to making calls, each conversation a building block in the fortress she intended to construct around Malcolm. She contacted family, friends, Malcolm's colleagues. She outlined the situation, imploring their support, their financial contributions. The responses were varied, offers of aid, expressions of sympathy, thinly disguised doubts. Evening found her immersed in a legal textbook at the library, deciphering statutes and precedents. The language was dense and convoluted, a labyrinthine tangle of legalese. She felt disoriented and overwhelmed, an amateur adrift in a sea of professionals. But she would not yield. Malcolm was counting on her. A phrase seized her attention, presumption of innocence. The words reverberated within her. That was all she required. That was the bedrock upon which she would erect her defense. She would remind everyone, the police, the prosecution, Judge Thompson, the entire world, that Malcolm Hayes was innocent until proven guilty. And she would vindicate him, even if it consumed her. A case built on prejudice. The courtroom air hung thick with anticipation, a silent audience to a play already scripted in too many minds. Malcolm sat rigidly, his gaze fixed on the American flag hanging behind Judge Thompson. It felt like a mockery. Justice for all? Not in this room, not today. The prosecutor, a Mr. Abernathy with a practiced air of sincerity, began his opening statement. The state intends to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Mr. Malcolm Hayes did knowingly and willingly participate in the grand larceny of valuable merchandise from Gems and Jewels on January 15. He gestured vaguely towards the jury, his words carefully chosen. While no eyewitness explicitly identified Mr. Hayes at the scene, compelling circumstantial evidence places him in the vicinity of the crime, shortly before and after its commission. Malcolm shifted in his seat. Circumstantial? That was it? He felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. His lawyer, Mr. Peterson, gave him a barely perceptible shake of the head, a silent warning. Abernathy continued, outlining the evidence, a witness who vaguely recalled seeing someone matching Mr. Hayes's description walking near the jewelry store. The fact that Malcolm was found several blocks away, 20 minutes after the estimated time of the robbery. And, most damningly, Officer Bradley's testimony. Officer Bradley took the stand, his uniform crisp and imposing. He swore to tell the truth, his eyes meeting Judge Thompson's with what seemed like rehearsed sincerity. Abernathy led him through his account. The description of the suspect broadcast over the radio. Bradley's observation of Malcolm walking at a brisk pace, allegedly looking agitated. Officer Bradley, Abernathy asked, his voice dripping with carefully crafted concern, did anything about Mr. Hayes's demeanor strike you as unusual? Bradley paused, drawing out the moment. Well, sir, he said, his voice laced with a folksy drawl that grated on Malcolm's nerves, he seemed out of place. Nervous, you know. Like he was trying to get away with something. Mr. Peterson objected, arguing that Bradley's assessment was subjective and speculative. Judge Thompson, his face an impassive mask, overruled the objection. Bradley continued, emboldened. And the way he was dressed, sir. Expensive-looking coat, nice shoes. Didn't quite fit the neighborhood, if you catch my drift. Malcolm clenched his fists. It was all there, the unspoken prejudice, the insidious assumptions. He was black, well-dressed, and therefore suspicious. It was a case built not on evidence, but on bias. During cross-examination, Mr. Peterson attempted to dismantle Bradley's testimony. He pointed out the vagueness of the initial suspect description, the lack of any concrete evidence linking Malcolm to the crime, the fact that Malcolm had been fully cooperative during the arrest. "Officer Bradley," Peterson asked, his voice sharp, "isn't it true that you stopped Mr. Hayes solely based on his race and appearance?" Bradley bristled. "That's not true, sir. I stopped him because he fit the description and was acting suspiciously." The answer hung in the air, hollow and unconvincing. As the day wore on, the prosecution presented its remaining evidence, the vague witness statement, the timeline that allowed for a dozen different scenarios, the absence of any stolen merchandise found on Malcolm. It was a flimsy case, held together by assumptions and innuendo. Yet, Malcolm knew, in this courtroom, with this judge, and with a jury likely influenced by the same prejudices that had landed him here, flimsy could be enough. When it was his turn to speak, Malcolm stood tall, his voice clear and resolute. "I am innocent," he declared, his gaze sweeping across the jury. "I did not rob that jewelry store. I was simply walking home from a meeting. I am a teacher, a husband, a member of this community. I have never been in trouble with the law. This entire situation is a mistake, a terrible injustice." He looked directly at Judge Thompson, his eyes pleading for fairness. But the judge's face remained impassive, a stone wall against his words. As he sat back down, a wave of despair washed over him. He was fighting a system, a deeply ingrained prejudice that saw him not as a man, but as a stereotype. The presumption of innocence felt like a cruel joke. Sarah's fight. The courtroom doors slammed shut, the echo reverberating in Sarah's chest like a death knell. Malcolm was still inside, swallowed by a system that seemed determined to devour him whole. But Sarah wouldn't let it. She wouldn't let prejudice be the final word. Outside, the air felt thick with a mixture of anticipation and judgment. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes like predatory eyes. She ignored the shouted questions and the flashing cameras, focusing instead on the small knot of supporters who waited for her. Their faces, a mix of worry and determination, fueled her resolve. Her first stop was Mrs. Davis, a neighbor known for her sharp memory and even sharper tongue. "He was here, Sarah." "Right here," Mrs. Davis insisted, perched on her porch swing. "Helping me bring in groceries. That boy wouldn't hurt a fly, let alone rob a store." Sarah scribbled furiously in her notepad, recording every detail, every nuance. She needed more than just Mrs. Davis's word, though. She needed proof. Days blurred into a relentless cycle of interviews, phone calls, and frantic searches. She spoke to Malcolm's colleagues at the school, gathering character testimonies that painted a picture of a dedicated teacher, a role model, a man incapable of the crime he was accused of. She tracked down former students, now adults, who remembered Malcolm's kindness and guidance. Each piece of information, each anecdote, was a brick in the wall she was building against the prosecution's flimsy case. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. She existed on lukewarm coffee and sheer willpower, her apartment transforming into a war room, strewn with documents, maps, and witness statements. One evening, she sat across from Mr. Peterson, Malcolm's lawyer, his face etched with concern. "The prosecution has built a narrative, Sarah, a very persuasive one for some. Circumstantial, yes, but damaging. We need something concrete to dismantle it." Sarah pushed a stack of papers across the table. "I have testimonies, Mr. Peterson. Character references. But you're right, it's not enough. I need to find something that places Malcolm somewhere else, anything that creates reasonable doubt. Mr. Peterson steepled his fingers, his gaze intense. Have you considered hiring a private investigator? Someone who can dig deeper, follow leads we might be missing? The thought had crossed her mind, but the cost was prohibitive. Their savings were already dwindling, stretched thin by legal fees. Still, she couldn't dismiss the idea. I'll look into it, she promised, her voice hoarse. Later that night, she visited Malcolm at the jail. The sterile environment, the clanging metal doors, and the oppressive atmosphere always made her heart ache. When Malcolm was led into the visiting room, his eyes lit up, but she could see the weariness etched on his face. How are you holding up? She asked, reaching for his hand across the cold metal table. He squeezed her hand tightly. It's difficult. But knowing you're out there fighting for me, that's what keeps me going. Sarah leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. I found a few people who will testify on your behalf. Mrs. Davis, some of your colleagues, former students. Malcolm managed a weak smile. That's wonderful, Sarah. But be careful. I don't want you putting yourself at risk. Risk is irrelevant, she said fiercely. I know you didn't do this, Malcolm. And I'm going to prove it. I promise you, I won't rest until you're home. She saw a flicker of hope in his eyes, a spark that had almost been extinguished. It was that spark that fueled her, that gave her the strength to face another day, another challenge, another obstacle in her fight for justice. Back in her apartment that night, Sarah researched private investigators, her head swimming with numbers and qualifications. She found one with a solid reputation and experience in wrongful conviction cases, but the initial consultation fee was daunting. She stared at the photograph of Malcolm on her desk, his smiling face a constant reminder of what was at stake. She would find a way. She had to. She would sell her jewelry, take out a loan, anything. Malcolm's freedom was priceless. The next morning, she went to the bank, her stomach churning with anxiety. She explained her situation to the loan officer, her voice trembling slightly. He listened politely, but his expression remained impassive. After reviewing her application, he delivered the news she had dreaded. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hayes, but based on your current financial situation, we are unable to approve your loan request. Sarah's heart sank. Another door slammed shut. Despair threatened to engulf her, but she fought it back. She wouldn't give up. She couldn't. As she walked out of the bank, defeated but not broken, she noticed a flyer posted on a community bulletin board, fundraiser for Malcolm Hayes, wrongfully accused. Hope flickered anew. People were willing to help. She wasn't alone in this fight. She took down the contact information, a renewed sense of determination filling her. This was far from over. Testimonies of character. The courtroom air hung thick with anticipation as Sarah approached the stand. Each step echoed the pounding of her heart. She raised her right hand, swore to tell the truth, and met the gaze of the jury, a sea of mostly unfamiliar faces. She saw a few sympathetic eyes, but mostly, she saw doubt. Her lawyer, Mr. Peterson, began gently. Mrs. Hayes, can you tell us about your husband, Malcolm? Sarah inhaled deeply, finding her center. Malcolm is everything to me. He's a devoted husband, a loving son, and the most dedicated teacher I know. He pours his heart and soul into his students, nurturing their potential and believing in them, even when they don't believe in themselves. Her voice, though trembling slightly at first, grew stronger with each word. He's not just teaching them facts, he's teaching them how to be good people. She recounted stories of Malcolm staying late after school to tutor struggling students, organizing community cleanup projects with his class, and spearheading a book drive to replenish the school library. She spoke of his quiet acts of kindness, the way he always had a listening ear for anyone who needed it, and the unwavering moral compass that guided his every action. The prosecution lawyer, a stern woman named Ms. Davies, rose to cross-examine. Her voice was sharp, laced with skepticism. "Mrs. Hayes, you're his wife. Of course, you're going to say good things about him. But isn't it possible you're blinded by your love for him?" Sarah met her gaze unflinchingly. "My love for Malcolm is real, Ms. Davies, but it doesn't blind me. It allows me to see him clearly, to see the man he truly is. A man incapable of committing such a crime." She paused, her voice cracking with emotion. "He's dedicated his life to serving this community. He would never betray it." Ms. Davies pressed on, attempting to poke holes in Sarah's testimony, questioning her objectivity, and suggesting that she was simply trying to protect her husband. But Sarah stood firm, her resolve unwavering. She answered each question with honesty and conviction, her voice ringing with truth. Back in the gallery, a small figure fidgeted in her seat. Lily Peterson, Mr. Peterson's daughter, clutched her mother's hand. She had been following the case closely, horrified that her favorite substitute teacher was being accused of such a terrible thing. Later that evening, Mr. Peterson found Sarah sitting alone in her living room, the lamplight casting long shadows across her weary face. "Sarah, I have something, potentially significant." Sarah looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "Lily, she remembers something. Something about that day." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "She remembers seeing Malcolm at the library." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "The library? But, the robbery, I know. It's not conclusive, but it's something. Lily says she was there with her mother, picking out books for a school project. She remembers seeing Mr. Hayes browsing the history section. She even remembers what he was wearing, that blue sweater he wears all the time." Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline. "Are you sure? Is she sure it was the same day?" "She's fairly certain. She remembers it was right before Martin Luther King Jr. Day because they were looking for books about the civil rights movement." He watched Sarah process the information. She was initially hesitant to come forward. "Sarah. She's just a child, and she was scared. My wife and I had to assure her that it was the right thing to do." Sarah stood up, pacing the room. This could change everything. This could prove he was nowhere near the bank. Mr. Peterson nodded. "I'm going to speak with the prosecution immediately. We need to explore this. We also need to consider having Lily testify." The thought of putting a child on the stand made Sarah uneasy. She's so young. Would she be able to handle the pressure? "We'll prepare her, Sarah. We'll make sure she's comfortable. But if she's telling the truth, and I believe she is, her testimony could be the key to bringing Malcolm home." He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Don't get your hopes up too high. The prosecution will try to discredit her, but we have to try. It's a start." As Mr. Peterson left, Sarah felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. It was a small spark, but it was enough to chase away some of the darkness. Lily's memory, a child's innocent recollection, could be the thread that unraveled the entire case. She whispered a silent prayer, thanking God for this unexpected glimmer of light. Now, she just had to pray that it would be enough. The unseen witness. Sarah perched on the edge of her seat, knuckles white from the vice grip on her hands. Judge Thompson's expression was a fortress, giving nothing away. Across the aisle, Malcolm's tight smile couldn't conceal the worry crinkling the corners of his eyes. Lily's testimony had ignited a fragile hope, but the prosecution had been relentless in their attempts to extinguish it. Mr. Abernathy rose. "Your Honor," he announced, his voice a resonant boom in the hushed courtroom, "we move to submit security recordings from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary." A ripple of whispers spread like wildfire. Sarah's breath hitched. This was the moment. Ms. Davies, the prosecutor, her features pinched and severe, shot to her feet. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. This evidence was sprung on us, we've had no chance to examine it. This is blatant prosecutorial ambush. Abernathy parried, smooth as silk. Your Honor, the footage was subpoenaed 2 weeks ago. The prosecution was notified then. After a protracted, agonizing beat of silence, Judge Thompson declared, objection overruled. The footage is admitted. Proceed, Mr. Abernathy. A technician wheeled in a large monitor. Sarah's pulse hammered against her ribs. More than Malcolm's fate hung in the balance, it was everything they'd fought for, all they believed in. The screen flickered, resolving into grainy monochrome imagery. Abernathy provided context. This is footage from the school library's security camera, dated January 15, the day of the alleged crime. The timestamp is visible in the corner. Sarah strained forward, her gaze locked on the screen. There, unmistakable, was Malcolm. He sat encircled by children on a vibrant rug, an open book his focus. His face was animated, lit from within as he read, his hands painting pictures in the air. The children, their faces mirroring his enthusiasm, were spellbound. The film advanced. The numbers in the corner ticked upward, 10:15 a.m. 10:30 a.m. 10:45 a.m. According to the prosecution, at 10:35 a.m., Malcolm was miles away, committing armed robbery. The contrast was stark, undeniable. Malcolm, the gentle educator, immersed in storytelling. Malcolm, the supposed armed assailant, terrorizing a shopkeeper. A small sound, half gasp, half sob, escaped Sarah. She dared a glance at the jury. Several leaned forward, their skepticism melting into dawning incredulity. Ms. Davies, however, looked as if she'd just swallowed something deeply unpleasant. Abernathy allowed the scene to play for another minute, the heavy silence broken only by the projector's whir. Then, he froze the image. Your Honor, he stated, his voice ringing with unwavering conviction, the evidence speaks for itself. Mr. Hayes was reading to his students at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary at the very moment the prosecution claims he was committing a felony. The courtroom exploded. A maelstrom of voices erupted, gasps of shock, cries of disbelief and outrage, calls for freedom, and accusations of injustice filled the room. The bailiff, red-faced, struggled to restore order, the gavel a futile weapon against the rising tide of emotion. Sarah fought for breath, tears stinging her eyes. She met Malcolm's gaze, he was fixed on the screen, his face a battleground of relief and disbelief. He offered her a tremulous smile. Judge Thompson, his visage still an enigma, delivered a final, resounding blow of the gavel, silencing the uproar. Order. I demand order. He addressed Ms. Davies. Ms. Davies, do you have any rebuttal to offer? Visibly rattled, Ms. Davies stammered, Your Honor, we require time to review this, to ascertain its authenticity. Ms. Davies, this evidence was provided to your office 2 weeks ago, Judge Thompson's tone sharpened noticeably. Do you have any substantive challenge to its authenticity at this time? Ms. Davies remained mute. The air crackled with anticipation. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the silence. In light of the evidence presented, and the lack of any credible challenge to its validity, this court is compelled to act. He paused, his eyes sweeping the gallery. The court finds that the prosecution has failed to demonstrate Mr. Hayes' guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. I therefore order Mr. Hayes' immediate release. A quiet victory. Judge Thompson's gavel fell with the finality of a slammed door. Case dismissed, he declared, his gaze unwavering, his tone devoid of warmth. No apology. No acknowledgement of the monumental error. Just dismissal. The word echoed in the sudden silence of the courtroom, a stark contrast to the emotional storm brewing within Sarah. Malcolm, still slightly dazed, reached for her hand. His fingers were cold, yet his grip was firm. It's over, he murmured, his voice thick with disbelief. Over? Was it really? Sarah knew this victory, as sweet as it tasted, was just a single battle won in a much larger war. The scars of this ordeal, the invisible wounds inflicted by suspicion and prejudice, would linger. As they walked out of the courthouse, the crisp January air felt strangely liberating. A crowd had gathered outside, a sea of faces, black, white, young, old, all united in their support. Banners reading, "Justice for Malcolm," and "We Stand with Hayes," bobbed in the wind. The roar of applause that erupted as Malcolm appeared was deafening, a wave of sound that washed over him, carrying with it the collective relief and joy of the community. His supporters surged forward, eager to embrace him. Reverend Johnson, his eyes brimming with tears, clapped him on the back. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose son Malcolm had tutored, pressed a warm empanada into his hand. Even Mr. Peterson, Lily clinging to his leg, offered a nod of approval. Lily, her eyes wide and earnest, tugged at Malcolm's coat. "I told them you were at the library, Mr. Hayes. I knew you didn't do it." Malcolm knelt, meeting her gaze. "Thank you, Lily. You were very brave." The crowd parted, making way for a battered minivan. Sarah smiled, recognizing the vehicle belonging to Mr. Davis, the school janitor. He insisted on driving them back, refusing to take no for an answer. The ride was filled with boisterous celebration. Mr. Davis regaled them with stories of how the community had rallied together, organizing protests and fundraising events. He spoke of the unwavering belief in Malcolm's innocence, the collective outrage at the injustice he had suffered. As they pulled up to the school, Malcolm felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. He hadn't seen his students in weeks. What would they think? How would he explain everything? He needn't have worried. As he stepped out of the van, a chorus of excited shouts erupted from the schoolyard. His students, along with several teachers and staff members, rushed towards him, their faces alight with joy. "Mr. Hayes! You're back. We missed you. We knew you were innocent." The children swarmed him, their small arms wrapping around his legs in a tight embrace. He ruffled their hair, his heart swelling with emotion. Looking over their heads, he saw Mrs. Jenkins, his fellow fifth-grade teacher, standing at the edge of the crowd, her eyes filled with warmth and relief. She gave him a small, knowing smile. "Welcome back, Malcolm," she said softly. "They've been asking about you every day." Stepping into his classroom felt surreal. The familiar scent of chalk dust and crayons filled his nostrils. The colorful artwork that adorned the walls, the carefully crafted projects displayed on the shelves, everything was exactly as he had left it. Yet, everything had changed. His students took their seats, their eyes fixed on him, eager for his attention. He cleared his throat, searching for the right words. "It's good to be back," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "I want to thank you all for your support. It meant the world to me." He didn't delve into the details of his arrest or the trial. Instead, he focused on the importance of justice, the power of truth, and the strength of community. He spoke of the need to stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult. Later that evening, as Sarah prepared dinner, Malcolm sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window. The sky was a canvas of deep blues and purples, streaked with the fiery hues of the setting sun. He was free, exonerated, vindicated. But the weight of the experience still pressed heavily on his shoulders. "You're quiet," Sarah observed, placing a comforting hand on his arm. He turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "It's not over, Sarah," he said softly. "This happened to me, but it happens to so many others. People who don't have a community to support them, people whose voices are silenced." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I can't just go back to teaching and pretend that nothing happened. I have to do something. We have to do something." Sarah squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with understanding. "I know," she said. "We will." The fight for justice, he knew, was far from over. His quiet victory was just the beginning.